It's late in the evening, and the shopping centre has gone quiet. You go up on the escalator and onto the balcony, walking towards the elevators. As you walk past a shop window, you feel the sensation that someone is behind you. You turn around and no one is there. But when you look into the shop window, you see the reflection of a monk standing behind you. You run into the elevator and he follows you. But as you move down to the ground floor, he stays on the balcony level. You run out of the lift and all is quiet. Welcome to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. I'm Clem Dalloway, and this episode is about the Kingfisher Shopping Centre, where people have been having strange experiences since the 1970s. The Kingfisher Shopping Centre in Redditch, Worcestershire, England, was officially opened in 1976 by the Prime Minister at that time, James Callaghan. The brand new shopping mall boasted around 150 stores and 4 multi-storey car parks. The walkways in the centre are based on the original layout of the old town roads, and many of the shops were built over the original foundations of the buildings that originated from the 19th century, some older. Where the public toilets now stand on Evesham Walk, once stood the Evesham Street Congregational Chapel, along with its graveyard, which was used for many of the local needlemakers, which was the main industry of the town. The graves were exhumed and moved to the Victorian cemetery on Plymouth Road, which is nearby. According to a local urban legend, some of the graves were never moved, and they are still beneath the shopping centre. Not long after the Kingfisher Shopping Centre opened, paranormal activity was reported, and most of it seemed to come from the Evesham Square area. When the centre was shut at night, police were called out many times to various incidents. They were called out one night as a man was seen walking around the balcony area above Evesham Square. A police officer saw the man and rushed up the steps and ran towards him. The man just casually walked away from the officer, as if he wasn't there. But as he approached the man, he turned left and walked into a shop front, even though there was a roller shutter that was down at the time. On another occasion, a baby was heard in Evesham Walk, and the police were called out again. They walked to the water fountain that was once in Evesham Square, and the crying baby sounded like it was coming from the balcony above. They went up the steps to the balcony, and the crying sounded like it was coming from the water fountain. The police stayed around for a few hours to search the area, but nothing was found. The crying baby has been reported by many people over the years, but no one has ever seen it. There used to be benches around the water fountain, and in the 1980s, 2 teenage cousins experienced something really strange. After they'd finished school, the 2 girls went into the shopping centre to browse the latest fashion accessories, when they decided to have a rest and sit on one of the benches around the water fountain. They were sat talking when a man approached them, pleading them for help. They said that the man was very vague and couldn't speak properly. They also noticed red marks on his neck. After a short while, he handed them a letter and walked away. The girls went back to one of their houses and they gave the letter to the one girl's dad. He read the letter, but he wouldn't tell the girls what it contained. It was a suicide note. Days later, when the local newspaper was delivered, one of the headline articles was about a prisoner in the local Hewell Grange prison who had committed suicide in his cell. His name was the same name that was on the letter. When people have been into the Works bookshop in Evesham Square, they've reported books being thrown across the shop and hitting or nearly hitting customers as they are shopping. The last shop at the end of Evesham Walk in Evesham Square is now Primark. But from when the shopping centre opened in 1976, it was Owen Owen, and later it became Alders. Over the years, workers in the building have experienced various amounts of paranormal activity. One lady worked at Owen Owen for 27 years. She often reported hearing footsteps and doors being slammed in the toilet area when no one was around. She also said that in the corridor the lights would flicker and shadowy figures would be seen walking around. An early morning cleaner who worked at Owen Owen and Alders when it changed would often find objects fanned out over the floor in different locations around the store. She and other workers would often experience cold spots. Hoovers were mysteriously unplugged when only the cleaners were in the store. She said that they always felt like they were being watched and that they would always see things moving from the corner of their eyes, but never seemed to get a full glimpse of anything. Near Evesham Walk is Canon Newton House, part of the shopping centre that has been used for offices and various other administration use. One night after the centre had closed and was locked up, a security guard had an experience that terrified him so much that he wouldn't go back into Canon Newton House. At night, the steps to the first floor were blocked off for security reasons, and the guards had to use the elevator to gain access between floors. This particular night, the guard was doing his usual rounds and had to go onto the first floor. He entered the elevator and pressed the button for the next level, and all was normal until he stepped out onto the next floor. A man dressed in a hooded robe that looked like a monk walked towards him. The guard ran back into the elevator and nearly fell over. He pressed the button to go back to the ground floor and the door shut, when suddenly the guard saw the monk in the mirror behind him. He'd walked through the elevator door. As he travelled down to the ground floor, the monk stayed on the upper level. Ghostly monks are a very common sight in Redditch. Perhaps it's because of the local Bordesley Abbey ruins that was founded by Cistercian monks in the 12th century and was dissolved during the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century. One of the shops was staying open late one night due to the launch of a new computer game, and the security guards worked late to manage the crowd. It was quiet around 11:15, so one of the guards decided to take their break early, while their colleagues stayed in the area. They walked along Evesham Walk and past the shop JJB Sports, and onto the old escalator, which led to the balcony. As they walked along the balcony, they happened to look through a window and noticed that there was another reflection, as well as their own. They described the figure as big built and all in black, but they couldn't see the face, and it felt like someone had crept up behind them. As this part of the centre was closed off, there was no chance of anyone else being around, but they felt a strange sense of panic and screamed. They turned around to see who was behind, but there was no one there. But they were only seen in the reflection. When they explained to the other staff what had happened, they said there's a monk who's always seen around that area, and many people have seen it, including work colleagues. Security guards have also reported having clothing pulled and being pushed by unseen hands. The cleaning cupboard for the janitors of the mall are next to the elevators of Cannon Newton House, and the janitors have reported seeing them move up and down without anyone in them and the doors staying open. In the early 1990s, a window cleaner was doing his daily round before the shops opened. When he had to clean the windows at Tesco, which used to be on the ground level and first floor of Evesham Walk, opposite Cannon Newton House, and all the way down opposite the public toilets. He was cleaning the windows on the first floor when he noticed an old lady walking towards him along the balcony. It was quite usual to see older people in the shopping centre early, so they could shop before the crowds turned up. He said that she was slightly hunched over and was carrying a bag. As she approached him, he stopped to say hello, but she ignored him and carried on walking past. As he watched the old lady walk past, she suddenly disappeared. Most of the shopping centre cleaners work at night or early in the morning when there are no customers, and many have left their jobs due to the supernatural incidences that only a few will talk about. On Evesham Walk is the public toilets. This is where the old Congregational Chapel once stood. One lady was working as a bathroom attendant, where there was a baby changing room in the ladies' room. One day, when she was cleaning the baby room, the door shut behind her and locked. She was trapped in the room for about 5 minutes. During this time, she felt the room turn icy cold. She was terrified. After a few minutes, the temperature in the room went back to normal, and she could suddenly open the door. It was only afterwards that she realised that there wasn't a working lock on the door. She said that she'd also experienced her clothes being pulled, heard whispering in her ear, and had cleaning products turn up in strange places. In the 1980s, the shop on the left side of the toilets was a mother and baby shop. Staff reported seeing a dark hooded figure looking like a monk, which would pass through the shop on a regular basis. Objects would be moved from one side of the shop to the other. The shop on the right side of the toilets was once an electrical hire store. They had very similar experiences, and TVs and radios would turn on or off on their own. A travel agent that was on Evesham Walk was subject to paranormal activity that was experienced by two cleaners early one morning in 2001. The cleaners used to work separately, one cleaning the shop area and the other would clean downstairs in the staff area. The cupboard which contained the cleaning equipment was downstairs. When one of the cleaners entered the cupboard, the door slammed and they were trapped inside, like the door had been locked. She heard footsteps running away from the cupboard. She knew it wasn't the other cleaner, as she was upstairs. She shouted and banged the door to try and gain the other cleaner's attention, but with no avail. After an hour, the cleaner who was working upstairs went to the cleaning cupboard and finally let her out. The door had locked. After sitting down with a cup of tea to help calm down, she explained what had happened. As they were discussing it, a man in a black suit walked past them and disappeared into the cupboard. A young man was once working at W.H. Smith's on New Walk. He reported seeing books partially being pulled out and some being thrown onto the floor, but it was only when no one was around. Another member of staff at W.H. Smith, who was also employed there from 1980 until she retired in 1991, once had to fetch a product for a customer from the stockroom. While she was in the stockroom, she saw an old man for around 3 seconds before he disappeared. Just long enough for her to describe him. She said he was wearing an old-fashioned suit and waistcoat, and he had grey hair and a beard. On Kingfisher Walk is Boots, the chemist, which has been in the same location since the shopping centre opened in 1976. A member of staff who had been working there for 15 years said that she had many strange experiences in the store, as well as other members of staff. Her first experience was within the first year of her working there. She had been told by her new colleagues that the shop was haunted, but didn't really believe it, even though she said that she'd always felt uneasy in various parts of the building. Several months later, she was asked by a colleague if she'd brought the keys for the counter from the office to the shop floor, in which she had, and she held them out in her hand to show her. After holding the keys out for a second or two, the keys flew out of her hand and hit the floor, landing right by her colleague's feet. Her work colleague smiled and said, "I told you we had a ghost." During the pandemic, she was asked to work the early morning shift, which started at 7 a.m. One morning, as she clocked into work along with another colleague, they heard what sounded like someone typing on the computer in the assistant manager's office. They both knew that they were the only two people in the building, but they still asked each other if they'd seen the boss come in. A week later, on another early start with the same person, they heard the elevator door slam shut. When they took a look at the elevator, the doors were still open. She always felt that she was being watched in the stockroom. But around Christmas in 2022, she was walking through the stockroom after finishing work when she saw a pair of disembodied legs walking in the opposite direction, about 8 feet away. Many people who have worked in the store have reported strange activity around the stockroom area, mostly with the elevator doors slamming shut and moving up and down with no one in them. Further down Kingfisher Walk, which is now known as a food area called the Hub, once had a set of large doors that separated the shopping centre from the bus station below. One night, as a cleaner was using the scrubber dryer machine on the main walkway of Kingfisher Walk, he noticed a dark shape that he thought was a security guard, standing on the other side of the doors. He stopped the machine and waved for them to come through. The dark shape came straight through the doors, through the machine, and straight through the cleaner too. He ran, shouting for help. Just behind the doors, before you reach the escalators, that lead to the lower shops and bus station was once a public house called the Swinging Sporran, which opened when the Kingfisher Centre opened. After a few years, it changed its name to the Limelight. It's now the location of the hardware store Wilkinson's. In the late 1980s, a cleaner who was working early in the Limelight noticed some movement across the bar. She thought it was the landlord and spoke to him until she realised that it was a short man in a bowler hat who seemed to be floating above the bar. She sat back in amazement and was overjoyed that she'd seen a ghost. She said that he was transparent and he left after a short while through the door. The bar staff of the Limelight experienced a lot of activity throughout the 1980s and 90s. Many said that they'd had their bottoms pinched as they'd bent over to pick things up. They'd hear a voice asking, "What do you want?" And the kitchen staff would often hear a voice calling their name. The landlord's wife was in the bar one day when she heard a voice say, "Boo." As she lifted her head and looked around, her hair was pulled over her face. Everyone who experienced the cheeky ghost believed that it was a little boy. A customer who sat at the bar once witnessed a glass lift up and turn upside down. After the pub closed down and Wilkinson's was built in its place, the activity didn't stop. Someone who worked at night to stock the shelves once heard banging on the windows at the front of the shop, but no one was there. Lights would flicker and there was a terrible smell, like something rotten, that would be smelled on occasions, but the source was never found. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. You can find more information about episodes on the website www.ghosttales.co.uk. We also have the Facebook page, facebook.com/Ghost Tales Podcast, and Instagram @Ghost Tales Podcast. This podcast will be out monthly and is available on most podcast platforms. All music, research, writing, production, art and sound effects are my own work.